played these instruments, and we wanted to make music that wasn't, that felt kind of relevant and vibrant and alive to us, and that's the stuff that turned us on the most. So that's what we ended up doing. So yeah, that's the long and short of it. And then in Youngblood, obviously, since most of us weren't, we weren't from New Orleans or whatever, so we didn't feel like we were representing that culture or part of that culture. So we ended up kind of studying the music a ton and trying to, develop the vocabulary stylistically and understand where it was coming from. But we grew up loving rock music and jazz music and hip hop and all these things. So it just kind of naturally bled into the way we compose, and it wasn't a decision that we made. There wasn't this big decision that was like, let's do New Orleans brass band with hip hop or whatever. It's just like writing songs, and these are the types of songs we wrote because these were the music we were influenced by. And it just kind of became what it is, So yeah, do we want to talk about the instrument type stuff, or do you guys have anybody have anything off the bat that they would like that they're interested in? It can be music specific, New Orleans music, Youngblood music specific. It can be non-music specific too, about just like the way the band does things and whatever, because we've been doing this forever now, 20 years now. If not, we'll just keep rolling with like stuff we usually talk about. I'm gonna hand it over to Nat then. We're gonna talk a little bit about like instrument roles in the music.
I'm gonna run this down real quick. Yeah, so in New Orleans style music, there's a specific role that everybody in the band plays, because as you just heard, the song that you just heard is obviously pretty scripted, right? There's not a whole lot of room for improvisation except for those two big solos that Zach and I took in the middle. But New Orleans music, one of the coolest things about it is that it's virtually all improvised, and it all comes from what's called the oral tradition, meaning that it's never been written down. All these songs they've existed for hundreds of years, and people just teach them to each other. And young little kids, 5 years old, are playing trumpet out in the streets, playing these things, and it's awesome. If you ever get a chance to go to New Orleans, it's not like this is a dead culture, like the jazz funeral thing doesn't happen anymore. This still happens all the time. We just posted some video of one on Facebook just the other day for a friend of ours. So it's still very much a living culture that they keep really dear there. And the roles of each of these instruments in this group are fairly simple, really. The main thing is that the trumpet is always the lead, but the lead doesn't just play down the melody note for note exactly the same way. Everything winds up being a little bit stylized. So even when you're playing the melody, you still get to have a little bit of fun with it, and you get to kind of play with where you want rhythmically for each of the notes of the rhythm of the music to go. So they get a nice chance to kind of play around and be playful, even though their job is the most strict of all of ours, because the melody has to be there no matter what happens. So that's what the trumpet does. The saxophone, or traditionally the clarinet in New Orleans music, is usually, they're kind of the person who fleshes out the harmonies in the middle of each bar. So they tend to play a lot of arpeggios just to kind of outline what each of the chords are. Still improvised, but they're improvising in a way that is demonstrative to other players on the stage, so they know what they're doing. And the trombones role, I guess you could call us kind of the comic voice of the group, because we're low and we're growly and we can move our slides around, and we tend to get the things at the end of the bar. If we do an improvisation, it's going from one change into the next chord change. So we don't so much outline what's going on within each chord as we show this is where it goes next. And you tend to do that in traditional New Orleans music. They have two different ways to describe it, and they're both kind of gross sounding. But one's called tailgating, and the other one is called gut bucket trombone. And that's when you hear those kind of in the old-timey sort of stuff. That's one of the aspects of the tradition that they don't do so much anymore in the new, more modern brass bands. But if you're ever playing traditional music, it's usually in the sound there somewhere. So that's our job, is kind of to be we're sort of the muscle, the comic, the moving voice, the thing that keeps things progressing from chord to chord. Then lastly, we have the tuba back there, whose job mostly is just to lay down the bass line and to be really loud and to have as much fun with it as he can. He gets a nicely, even in the more modern brass band music like we play, The tuba still gets to have the most improvisatory role because he's the only guy in this group that isn't part of a section, if you notice. So he's the only guy who has some freedom to play his own thing and to move in his own way from chord to chord, just like an improvising bass player would. And then after we get done playing this song, Dave's going to go into some talking about the rhythms of New Orleans and the drum-based stuff, which is really, I find it really interesting, and it'll actually really help you horn players too, just to sort of understand how this stuff is constructed. But for right now, we're going to give you a little example of the funeral tradition, where we're first going to play what's called a dirge, where we play a New Orleans traditional spiritual jazz number, and we start out playing it very slowly and solemnly. If you saw this on the street, you would see a bunch of people all dressed up in nice black and white suits with sort of like, it looks like a sea captain's hat on their head, except it's black. And they all walk really slow. It's sort of a coordinated little procession down the street. And then after a certain point, you're going to hear us cadence, and then Dave is going to kick it off, and that's our version of turning the body loose. And then we're going to play the exact same number, but up-tempo and joyful, the way that they celebrate a person's life rather than mourning their passing, okay? So we're going to play a traditional New Orleans number called Just a Closer Walk with Thee, so you can check this out.
The room's so quiet. So weird. So yeah, as far as rhythm and how it informs all this stuff goes, even if you're not a drummer, are there any drummers here? Nah. Oh yeah, yeah. It's important, I think, to approach this stuff from a drum perspective sometimes, not just because we're drummers and we like drums, but with a lot of music that has its roots in the African diaspora, the rhythm is kind of the primary component of what makes it danceable. And I know, like, one of my favorite quotes is from Eddie Palmieri, talking about how he's a piano player, talking about how everybody has to be a drummer if you're going to be someone that can solo and make people move. And in this music, one of the primary musical devices is call and response, and you hear it in the trumpets, you hear it all over the place, but it's inherent even in just the drum beats, and the fact that there's, for most groups, first of all, ignore this, just ignore that for a minute. Usually for most brass bands, it's kick drum and snare drum, and that kind of sets itself up to be call and response the whole time, because the music isn't just going boom chick boom chick boom chick boom chick boom chick, or that would be polka music or whatever. There's a call and response constantly where the kick drum kind of says where the beats are and the snare drum says where the upbeats are. Where those, and the fact that that's going on, that the strong beats are marked by the low voice and the high voice is kind of marking the upbeats. That's one of those things that keeps the musical beat really apparent, but also keeps pushing the music kind of into the sky, or lightens the music up. But just doing that by itself isn't quite enough, right? So there's these little conversations that the snare drum and bass drum have that kind of push the phrases forward. There's a little one at the end of the first bar. There's a little one on the and of 4. And then typically at the end of the second bar, there's a longer one that kind of is like the and of 3, and 4, and the end of 4. And the snare drum always has a little call, just a little rough that kind of informs where that goes. And then throughout the music too, there's all kinds of weird little things going on. And since Tom and I have played together forever, we kind of know when we're going to do these things. But it's one of those things where you have to play with someone so much to kind of understand, I tend to do this type of thing here, he tends to do that type of thing there. And we don't always do those things. A lot of times we'll try to do something that, one of us isn't expecting. And then we're always like, ha ha, because that's just as fun. But you'll hear this kind of call and response thing going on between the kick and snare. If I were to vocalize it, the basis of that gospel beat kind of sounds like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Get out, and that kind of just keeps on happening, where it's like every and of 4, he pushes the music forward into the next bar, and then 2 bars later, he's like, okay, now we got to push harder. And I think, and this is all kind of hypothesizing. My feeling is that because this music is street music and it's meant to move people down the street, it's not enough just to mark the beats. It's like at the end of every little phrase, you're like, yeah, keep dancing. At the end of every bigger phrase, you're like, no, you're going to have to dance harder than that. And then there's things that you do kind of at the beginnings or ends of solos, or all these things that are the vocabulary where it kind of makes a big deal out of it. But that, for my money, the call and response between a high and a low voice is kind of what makes all music that is dance music danceable. Like in post-gospel music, where the backbeat becomes slower and it's just kind of like boom, catch, boom, catch. That constant yin and yang of call and response of low and high is like what makes our bodies kind of respond to it. And how you mess with it is what makes it intellectually interesting or whatever. Or even just the whole idea of why syncopation moves our brains and our bodies. It's like you could call, the calls any note that's on a strong beat. The response is any note that falls off a beat. And how much you're willing to like play with that relationship. It's like, because we all know, you're like, syncopation's really cool. But if I play something where I just go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and, it's like, it's not very danceable. It doesn't sound super cool, right? There's like a certain amount of call and response or ups that our brain can take, and then you need little anchor notes to kind of feel where the beat is. And playing with that relationship is something that I think we have a lot of fun with, because it's interesting just to mess with. I mean, you guys are all musicians. It's interesting just to mess with like, if I play one, boom, and I hit there, I'm like, yeah, that's still kind of cool. Like it's like I got there just in time to have it not get cute, you know. But anyway, getting a little off track. But we're gonna give you an example of that kind of the gospel beat conversation, and then talk a little bit about how we kind of arrived at Youngblood after that. He did it. He did one little where he was like, I bet you didn't think I'd play the end too. So this, excuse me, this type of beat is going on for jazz funerals and the music on the streets for a long time. And then in the kind of early, mid part of the 20th century, essentially bar owners in New Orleans noticed that people would stay longer and drink more if there was music, if there's entertainment. They also didn't want to pay a whole band to do it. They didn't want to pay a whole big band or whatever it was. And they realized that piano players could make people dance alone. And piano players, I mean, it's kind of like a chicken or egg thing, realized that if they could make people dance alone, you know, they could be the entertainment for the bar and get paid, and they would get paid, you know, more because there was only one of them. And it hasn't really changed, right? Like, club owners would much rather hire a DJ than your band. And that's because it's a lot cheaper to hire a DJ than your band. But so this style of piano playing developed in New Orleans where in the left hand, the bass would be playing rhythmically, and then the right hand would cover everything else. But people like Ray Charles is the most famous kind of proponent of this. And the rhythms became not just gospel rhythms, not just one being donkey, but it became much more influenced by Afro-Caribbean rhythms or clave-based rhythms. There's also a whole tradition in New Orleans of a thing called the Mardi Gras Indians, which we're not going to get into really today, but the merging of this gospel culture and the Mardi Gras Indian culture created a lot of what is considered New Orleans music now. And that beat, there's like a beat that all of the kind of Mardi Gras Indian tunes are to, is very similar to the left-hand piano rhythm, and that rhythm is one that is immediately recognizable to anybody. And we call this rhythm one-bar clave because you are all, I'm sure, familiar with what would be considered like standard clave, or if you want to get deep, 3/2 stone clave, which is bench, inch, 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 right? And there's millions and millions of songs with that throughout history. But just taking the first bar of that, the 3-bar, and repeating it became the basis for a ton of New Orleans music, just going and the piano players might be going right, and then it became dance music, and brass bands ended up playing that music. So that changed the rhythmic approach to the music when groups like the Dirty Dozen started saying, like, we're not just going to play gospel, we're going to play this Mardi Gras Indian stuff, we're going to play Dr. John, we're going to play bebop, we're going to play all these things. That more Afro-Caribbean approach, clave-based approach to the beats became kind of the beat of the street in New Orleans. And I think Rebirth, after Dirty Dozen, is the band that really took it to the place that is the cornerstone for what brass band music is in New Orleans now. So we're going to play an example of that beat, and you'll notice, like, Tom is basically playing one-bar clave. If you want to play floor tom and do that kind of the Mardi Gras Indian rhythm, for what it's worth, is one-bar clave, just kind of spicy. It's like instead of just going it's like It's kind of a 2-bar clave pattern, but we'll get into that. And then what we'll do kind of halfway through it is I'm just going to flip to playing backbeats on 2 and 4. But I always feel like this is an interesting thing because Youngblood does a lot of this messing with whether something's upbeat or backbeat based. And when you put the snare drum, the responsive or the high voice on the backbeats, it's always interesting to me how it totally changes the way the beat feels and how it feels like you should dance to it. Like it almost physiologically changes the effect it has on you. So we'll do that because obviously even in that song right there in New Blood, we did a bunch of that, right? Where we're playing essentially the Mardi Gras Indian beat and then going into this backbeat based thing, even though the root of the rhythm we're playing is still 1 bar clave. So yeah, we'll do a little of that. Oh, and then I turn the snares off. Basically start playing congas. Like that connection to the Caribbean becomes readily apparent with this stuff. Boom, 2, ha, boom, boom. Where we were getting a lot of our ideas, which also came from groups like Dirty Dozen and Rebirth, and then Soul Rebels. It was a brass band that what they started doing in the mid-'90s was really inspirational to us because they took this whole thing and made it like insanely aggressive and just took a lot of risks that I think were really, really interesting. So yeah, that's kind of where all this stuff comes from. And now what we usually do at this point in a workshop is kind of teach everyone a song in the way that you would be taught the tune in New Orleans. We might be able to do this just by playing the tune through the tune and then just playing the tune together. For instance, like Brooklyn is probably a song a lot of you, maybe some of you know this song, Brooklyn. Like when Nat wrote Brooklyn, it's like he came to rehearsal and he was like, okay, here's the trumpet part. Or, playing it or just singing it and you learn the stuff by ear and then you just start playing the tune. And, we're huge proponents of being able to do that because you're not married to looking at a thing and then trying to translate that thing into something that's going to move people. It's like I teach like this almost exclusively when it's like, because I teach drumline and drum corps and stuff, and the rhythm, like on the page, sometimes that stuff looks insane, and you're just like, what is this 7:5/3? And you're just like, no, just check it out. Like here's what so and so are playing, and you just sing it, and it's like that vocalization. I think is much better for our brains to just kind of feel it as music. Plus, and you can hear, Nat do this or anybody do this when they're teaching the tunes, you can actually tell someone how you want something to be stylistically interpreted by how you sing it at them and teach it, right? Like if we were singing, if you're looking at the notes for New Blood and that trumpet melody, and just reading it down, you would be like, da 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 da. And then you'd be like, well, that's shitty music, But you can sing it at someone and sing it the way you want it to be performed. So yeah, we're gonna play a tune called Hurricane George, which was a song written in New Orleans in the early 2000s, like pre-Katrina, after the hurricane called George. But and there's gonna be 3 parts to the tune. You'll hear it. It's gonna go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And just kind of see if you can memorize it some. And I'll hand this over to Nat. He might want to talk to you more.
Yeah, this is a fairly simple New Orleans tune that should be easy to pick up quick. You heard Dave mention the term call and response earlier, and that applies not only to drums, it applies to every single aspect of New Orleans music. And this tune is almost exclusively call and response based. So we're just going to play it, and Charlie is going to hold up finger symbols. He'll either hold up a 1, a 2, or a 3, just to let you know which part is which. Okay, and we're gonna go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So you get 2 shots to hear the melody and the B part. So everybody just kind of pay attention to what we're playing from wherever we are. And we'll see how quickly we can dive in and swim here.
And like today we were in Wales and we did this with a group of high school kids and mostly younger actually. So this isn't the most intellectually challenging tune, but the thing to focus on is the attitude and style that each section is playing their part with. You're going to figure this tune out in 5 seconds, but just that there's a style that goes behind it that isn't just dot 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 dot. You know. So.
Cool. All right, Devin's going to kick it off. So our tuba player, pay attention to what he's doing. Okay.
So, might as well all just stay there. There's not enough room.
Yeah, there's no need to break up into groups. Let's just play each of our parts individually at that. The first one, we're all playing the same thing, just on the different sides of the phrase. We're in the key of B flat minor. So everybody's first note is going to be that B flat concert, and then just go up the B flat minor scale, and then come back down, and then up and down to F. Okay? And put a little bit of stank on one of those notes. A little bit of a bend. Okay? Let's play part one, everybody. Caller. Usually there's only one person who calls, so it makes it easy for you to kind of do a variation, and then the responders will still respond en masse as a group. Okay, part two gets a little bit more complicated. It splits into two sections. The trumpets go to a kind of the double time call and response thing where they start calling and responding to each other a lot faster than they were. So let's just solo that part out first and check that out with the trumpets. Here we go. 1, 2, 1. So you're doing a triplet thing, and note-wise, this is how I like to teach stuff, is using numbers for note names instead of do, re, mi, because I find that to be really kind of needlessly confusing. So the whole melody note-wise is 1, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 1, 4, 3. Makes sense? If you're talking about each note of the scale as a number. 1, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 1, 4, 3. So it'll come up your fingers like like so. That's what the trumpets will do. We trombones have our own part that we do that just kind of keeps repeating itself on a shorter loop than we were doing before. That sounds like this. We split into harmony for this one. Check it out. Yeah, so that could be in 3 harmonies at once. If you want to, you can keep on playing the same notes that you were playing the first time. Just go ba ba da ba do dee doom, ba ba da ba do beam. Exactly like the part 1 part goes. Makes sense? But the basic melody that we're doing is 1, 2, 3. Ba boo da boo dee dee da. Ba ba doo dee da dee da. Ba ba dee dee da dee da. Ba dee 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 dee. That's when everybody meets up, is at the end of that 4-bar phrase. Ba da 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 da. Okay? Do you guys do something different there, or which team do you play for on this? Yeah, basically the same kind of thing. They're playing auxiliary trombones on this section. Let's try this out with all the lower brass players. Right, so you could pick any one of those 3 harmonies. Generally in brass band music, your harmonies are always going to start on either the 3, the 5, or the 7. In this case, Matt's starting on the 7. Go ba ba da dee da dee dum, ba ba da boo da dee dum. Tony's starting on the 5. Ba ba da ba da bee da. I'm starting on the 3. Ba ba da ba da bee da. Okay? That's how you can assemble these things nice and quickly when you're trying to write your own music, and I'm sure you're going to be very soon. Okay, everybody cool on part 2, more or less? If it's still taking you some time, don't worry. There's going to be plenty of time to play it through, and just jump in. Play whatever you want. Okay, let's do part 3 real quick, and then we're going to start having everybody try this stuff together. On part 3, everybody's playing the same rhythm, and the rhythm goes like this: 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Ba da da, ba da da, ba da da dee dee da da, ba da 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 da, ba da dee dee da da, da da da. That same thing to close it. Ba da ba da, ba da dee dee da da. Makes sense? That's the rhythm that you're playing. And on that one, just like the other ones, you can pick either the 1, the 3, or the 5. You could probably pick the 7 too if you felt real cute about it. But in this case, just so everybody knows, in the key of B flat, the 1 is B flat, the 3 is D flat, the 5 is F, and the 7 is A flat. Concert pitches, of course. Let's all try and play that together. Just get a nice grip on that rhythm. Even if you're not quite sure of the notes yet, try and come in on the rhythm and get the tonguing the way that we're trying to do it. Since we're minor, that third B flat instead of D flat. Okay. So, let's try it. We're going to have you guys take some solos too.
Yeah, everybody stand up so we can swing at each other that one.
This is the full immersive experience where we're just throwing you into the deep end. Yeah, our one drum friend should come up. Okay, everybody. Now we're going to just jump in here, but I want to talk a little bit about soloing first. We're going to have you guys solo, but we're not asking you guys to solo so that you can show us how hot your chops are. We don't need to hear all of your fancy licks, because brass band doesn't really end up being about that. Just like in the way that we try and inflect everything that we do while the band is playing as a group, when you're a soloist, it's way more so. You shouldn't have a single note go by that you haven't put some sort of attitude behind. It's mostly about the character that you bring to the notes that you're playing. It's not about how fancy the notes that you're playing are. This is like outdoor music that's meant to be heard blocks and blocks away. So everything that you do should basically be the musical equivalent of saying, "Look how tough I am." Okay? Keep it simple, keep it rhythmic, and keep it nice and loud and aggressive and fun and exciting. All right.
Just for fun, you guys want to know a fun little Youngblood lore? Back in the day, 15 years ago, every now and then we would, a friend of ours would be like, "Hey, can I sit in? You guys are in Lincoln. Can I sit in?" And we were like, "Yeah, sure." And then we realized that we shouldn't ever do that because nobody realizes how loud you have to play to be in Youngblood. We would have these friends of ours that are totally killer musicians sit in and take a trombone solo that no one could hear. And then so that's when we established our nobody sits in rule. And then it finally made it on a record. Right. Well, no, everyone's sitting in now. But anyway, I just thought it was funny.
Okay, so once we get started, raise up your hand if you want to take a solo, and then before we go back into the melody, we're going to have a couple of choruses where everybody solos at once. Okay? And don't just try to fill up the entire space and just paste it full of as many notes as you can. See if you can take this opportunity to listen across the room a little bit. If you hear somebody play something that sparks your interests, play something that answers it. Call and response, just like we've been talking about the whole time. Okay? All right, let's give it a shot. This is Hurricane George. It was written after what is now about to be like 4 hurricanes ago in New Orleans. We heard there's another one on the way, which we'll see what happens there. But here we go. This was written by the Hot 8 Brass Band back in the late 90s at some point. Let's try it. Everybody look at your at your guide member's fingers or slide if you need help knowing what to do next. But just make some sound. If you're making a sound that sounds wrong, pick a different note. Woo! Wow. Nice work, guys. That was awesome. Quickly put together. There's something about everybody soloing at once that kind of gets rid of some of the jitters and being afraid that everybody's going to hear you mess up. So that might be a nice way to kind of dip your feet into the water if you're really interested in learning how to start soloing. But that's another one of the benefits of playing music by ear, because the act of learning a song by ear is kind of similar to the act of improvising. By the time you've learned all of those notes and all of the harmonies and all the things that make that song what it is, those are all things that you can put into your solo bank for later. You can use that in your solo. You can use all that stuff. So, yeah, that's a great lick right there. That's even fast. So yeah, just kind of use every opportunity that you can to learn stuff by ear. I can't overstress how important that is, because that's a lot of what made music fun for me when I was a kid. When I first started out, I was playing tuba. I've been the tuba player in this band for 20 years, but I'm playing trombone right now for no reason. But when I started playing, I was into it and I was having fun in band and all that stuff. But I quickly realized that I picked the wrong instrument on tuba, because I couldn't find any examples of the tuba being an essential part of a band that made people dance. And I wanted to play music that made people dance. So when I finally discovered New Orleans brass band music, I was like, oh yeah, this is it. But there wasn't any sheet music, so I just had to listen to record after record, really absorb everything as much as I could. We always take trips down to New Orleans as often as we possibly can just to go and check out the brass bands. We're amazed at how receptive they are and how much they appreciate the fact that we are being reverent to their tradition and that we're spreading it out to more people, which we weren't really expecting, actually. We thought there might be a chance they'd just think of us as posers from up north who don't really understand what's going on, but we were amazed at the warmth with which they greeted us and how much they take to it when you show them that you respect what they're doing, they'll respect what you're doing. So I would like for all of you guys to just, whenever you hear a song that you like on the radio, take 20 minutes and sit down and see if you can figure out how the first part goes. Because it's all music. It doesn't matter if the part that you're listening to started out on a trombone or started out on a mellophone. You're not going to find many of those. But anything that you can hear, any piece of music that you can hear, you can play on your instrument. It's all the same 12 notes in that chromatic scale for all of us as instrumentalists. So just kind of use that opportunity to find the fun in practicing, to find ways to pick out music that you never would have thought that a trombone would be able to play. Go ahead and play it, and find some friends who want to play it too, and then all of a sudden you'll have a band. Doesn't take too long.
But it will take your band 20 years to get good.
At least, yeah.
Or at least get good at faking it.
Let's get some questions. You guys are shy. We just gave you a full-on experience. There must be something to talk about. What you got?
When you started writing music, is that sort of how you did it? You just sat down with some records and sort of got some licks that you liked, or did you just kind of have a jam session and then...
That's exactly what I did. Yeah, the question for the tape is, when I first started composing music, did I just... I don't have to repeat it. You probably heard it there. That's exactly what I did. Basically, I would just, if I heard a tune that really inspired me, before I would have just kind of listened to that piece a bunch and been like, wow, that's a really cool piece. But as I became more analytical in my listening, I would think, what are the things that make that piece as cool as it is? Why does that piece move me as much as it does? And then I would try and figure that out and take those elements away and make a new piece, so that I'm not stealing anything except for a general vibe or a feeling, the way that it made me feel when I listened to it. It's a great way to get started on composing. Yeah, I fully recommend it. A lot of people call that stealing, but that's all fair in composing. You can steal stuff as long as you're clever about it.
Maybe it's worth noting too that in brass band music in New Orleans, frequently they'll be like, if there's 3 parts in a song, one of those parts will just be wholesale lifted, stolen from some classic R&B song or another brass band song or whatever. And that I feel like is a great way to start composing too. Like you take the third part of Hurricane George, and you're like, what could I hear coming after this? Or what could I hear coming before? It's a nice way to kind of open the door to still don't know like where the song originally came from because all the brass bands play it and everybody says they wrote it or they wrote this or whatever. Or you find out that like some song that you thought was a reverse song. It turns out it's this like really little lost gem from the 60s or whatever. So yeah, I'm a fan personally of stealing, borrow, steal.
Yeah, think of it as being more similar to the hip-hop culture, where if you take a sample from a James Brown tune, that's not just stealing a James Brown song, you're just kind of incorporating a smaller part of it into something that's new. So it's more just sort of a collaborative mixture of things rather than thinking of it as stealing, and it's completely in line with the New Orleans culture to do that. So when you get started, feel free to steal a lot. As you get better at composing, you won't want to anymore, because then you'll have your own good ideas to use. But it's a great way to get started. More questions?
What's your favourite part of the process? Is it writing a new tune, or is it taking it on the road, or doing stuff like this?
Anybody else want to answer this one?
Charlie lives in Switzerland now, guys.
Well, Nat is largely, of our catalog, Nat is largely the guy who writes it, so you'd have to talk, well, he just did talk about his process. It seems like he enjoys it. But I think that, and in Dave and Nat are the only true really original guys left in the band at this point, although myself and, oh, come on, Devin. Oh, man. LA people, come on. But, these guys, Dave now is the leader of the band and has to deal with the day-to-day baloney of phone calls, dealing with the record label, dealing with the venues, So you could ask him about the process too. I'm sure that in the end, what we're happiest is that we're still playing with our group of guys that we've assembled over the years. And Devin, this is his first tour. That's the fifth time he's played on stage with us was today, third time for a show. Yeah, and this is the second time today. And Jerome, we've known Jerome since he was like 10 years old, and so we've got old school guys and we've got new school guys. And I think that even though Dave deals with the day-to-day much more, the rest of us are just happy to get together still with our, it's like you assemble your team, for a month or 2 months every year and go out and play the music that he wrote a lot of. More of us, the rest of us have collaborated lately. So you know that the people that are in the room are there to hear you play Brooklyn, which is Youngblood Brass Band's tune. And we play the definitive version of it in our minds, of course, because he wrote it and he's on stage doing it. So that you can't beat that. We will have a new album. We're gonna have to start working on original tunes for a new album pronto, and you never know who's gonna come up with the little nugget for that tune for the composition. So there's also a fun process in that you submit something that you think is quality and it gets rung through the strainer or whatever it gets rung through, to see what of your idea survives and makes it on the album. That's a cool thing, to get a little ownership of the tunes.
Yeah, I would add just there's a general abstract feeling of accomplishment when you kind of like when a song gets close to being ready to be mixed down and you're like, yeah, this actually sounds good. And that's like, I think that's one of the most rewarding things, is just feeling that kind of like long-term personal feeling of accomplishment that you made this music that you really like. And obviously there's an instant gratification of if we're playing the London show or whatever and people are really responding to something and they all scream and whatever and everybody's dancing, that feels great, But yeah, I don't know if either of them are better. It's like some people like playing more than others. Some people like, creating more than others. Meh. Doing these things is actually really fun too, because we don't typically talk about the music much,
And of course, we like touring because this band would not have existed for this long if we didn't like hanging around each other. If we did, there would be no reason for it to keep going. Another question?
Any tips in general for someone who's really, at the beginning of things, in a sense? I get the sense all you guys, did music in school, you've got a background and, you've learned whatever you need to learn about music theory and different bits and pieces. You were talking obviously about learning by ear, the kids on the streets in New Orleans, and there's some kind of, dichotomy there, but there's obviously, you can't just pick up something and start playing random. So to what amount of, look, you need to put in your graft in learning the theory, learning how these things fit together, learning your scales, you know, and your X, Y, Z, before you then go down the route of, hey, just try and listen, you know.
Tony, you want to talk?
Sure.
22 minutes a day. That's all it takes. Doesn't matter what you do.
And your abs.
Well, I teach a fair amount of private students who maybe are sort of in a similar kind of thing. You know, I teach a lot of adult students who are trying to play more with, you know, just get better and maybe start their own band. I always kind of tell them the same thing, that you have to make it part of, like, if you're going to study with me, I always tell them that you have to go do your homework of try to find somebody else, some other people to play with, like, constantly, you know, and hopefully try to find some people that you think are better than you. It's not just maybe going to jam sessions, but just calling people up and be like, hey, you want to come over and play some tunes, or and that doesn't really matter if it's a whole band or not. It could be one other person, but I think that is going to be a lot more helpful to, maybe, like you said, if you're starting out and you're trying to do something like this, then rather than just staying in your bubble and practicing tunes in your house, and just make it as much of a goal to try to find other people to play with that are like-minded, or you know, that are willing to, like, you know, like I said, if they're better than you, they're willing to kind of, you know, humor you a little bit and play and try to give you some tips, and you're going to get better, like, so much quicker than if you're just, like I said, practicing at home and that's it. And then you know, students just come to the next lesson. I'm like, do you play with anybody? They're like, no. Well, you can kind of tell, you know, that progress really improves once they start actually doing that homework that I suggest. So that would be my tip. But yeah.
Yeah, one, two, just based on the for adult students, you know, you don't have normally as much free time as we did when we were kids. So back in the day when we were preteens or whatever, then it was just a matter of, like, do I read comic books or do I play my scales? But now there's so much more going on that we really have to just kind of pick our battles and figure out. So rather than ever practicing something because you feel like it's something that you need to do, because you're told that if you don't do this, you won't be proficient enough to, you know, get the stamp of approval. You're not a good musician until you know all these patterns and all these scales. Really, it could be, you could just boil it down to, what tunes do you like to play, and work on the harmony that you need in order to be proficient at those tunes. You know, just trim the fat and just say, okay, I want to play the shit out of Hurricane George. So you got to learn the chord changes: one minor, dee doo doo, boo boo doo doo dee doo doo, boo boo doo dee doo doo, boo. And so say, like, all right, I'm going to learn my G7 flat 9 scale because that's the last chord of Hurricane George and of that section. I want to be able to play some fancy shit over that. So I'm going to work on G minor 7 or F concert minor 7, F7 flat 9, and not necessarily in all 12 keys, because you want to be able to play Hurricane George right now, so you don't need to do it in all 12. So it's just pick your battles and make sure that whatever your technical practice is, that it's always being that you're aiming towards a particular musical application, and then you won't have to feel like you're swimming around in a whole sea of stuff, of prerequisites that you must learn to, you know, whatever. So yeah.
It's similar to that. What we did, I mean, this is long enough ago that it was down to me, Nat, Dave, another guy who's not here yet, and some other guys who used to be in the band. Again, trimming the fat. We sat around and listened to the same music, barbecuing and, you know, possibly consuming some adult beverages a lot of nights, you know, together. And that's a way where you get that group of people, because there's also random people coming in and out of that scene who maybe you didn't ever play with, but they brought in that new album that you had never heard any of that stuff before, and then all of a sudden that really informed the music that you were listening to. Because at this point, you know, especially now, this is even pre-computers being worth anything when I'm talking about now. It's a never-ending maze or labyrinth of music that you could possibly play that you like. I think it's not a bad idea to say, let's get it down to something we like. You get a group of guys, or you know, guys here, but, you know, group of people together that we clearly have something in common in this vibe of music. Let's make that music, rather than be like, well, how am I going to play my my bop skills in this band if we don't play bebop? Well, then that's not the band that we're just about to make. We're making a different band. That's what I say. You know, make a choice. Like, this is what we want to do. Yeah.
More questions?
Ever since.
Yeah.
So
more like maybe for the guys on this side of the band, have you got any tips for sort of linking the rhythm section together, your drums and your bass and that sort of thing? One thing I noticed about you guys is you're so tight together and so sort of in sync, just playing together a lot.
Well, Tom and I played together a long time, but I'm gonna let Tom talk about this. Tom, sure. Get in there. Get in there. Tom plays a lot of gigs in Nashville with different bass players.
Yeah, I think that the simplest answer is just time. It just takes time to play together, especially because, I think we're all drum set players primarily, so it's kind of easy when you're in charge, and you just have to link up with the bass player and vice versa. But the particular challenge here is that not only do we have to link up with you, but we have to play as an ensemble together. And, everyone's got sort of a different, metronome in their head for how they feel time. Some feel it ahead, some feel it behind. So you kind of got to work within those parameters too, and just kind of decide amongst each other, like where is it gonna be? Like when I'm playing drum set, I can put it, wherever I want to. If I want to lay back or play ahead, it's kind of up to me. But I can't just dictate. Well, I guess I could, but for the most part, you can't just kind of dictate where the groove is going to be at without everyone else falling in line. And the way we do that is just, again, we kind of know how each other plays, and we've been doing it for so long. Does that make sense? I don't know. You want to add?
I was gonna add. If I knew when I was starting bands what I know now, what I would have done is record us playing and then have brutally honest conversations about what you're hearing, and talk about the way things feel and whatever. Or if I tend to feel this, I think, a little faster than you want to feel it or whatever. Or even, you don't have to turn it into a science fair, but it might be helpful to turn it into a science fair. Be like, because there are things about, like, for instance, this type of music where, like, you're always playing this rhythm, this, right? The degree to which the second note in that pattern is laid back completely changes how that rhythm is felt. Like if I'm playing it strict grid 16ths or whatever and going, that isn't exactly the feel that we go for. Like that's a much more straight up and down, kind of like Caribbean feel. That note is swung a little, but it's not swung to the point where you're thinking of like right? Because it's not like doing it's not doing that, right? It's this weird little thing. It's a little behind, and like defining those things is really hard, and a lot of these like how the music tends to feel or the rules of the music are really, really hard to ascertain just by listening to records sometimes, or even like, seeing music and all that stuff. Sometimes it's just like, well, what are the rules though, And some of those types of things took us years and years to kind of figure out, because there tends not to be rules. There tends to be ways things need to feel. Anyway.
Just to add on to that, have any of you guys seen that James Brown movie that came out a couple of years ago? I can't remember what it was called, but it had a scene in it where James Brown was running a rehearsal and he was trying to break in a new guy in his horn section, and his name was Maceo Parker. He's a super famous, awesome alto sax player. And Maceo was messing something up while he was playing, so James stopped the whole band and he said, "Maceo, what instrument is that? What's that instrument?" He said, It's an alto sax, James. He said, "No, it's not. What instrument is that?" He said, "I swear, it's an alto sax." Then he pointed to one of his other band members. He said, "Fred, tell me what instrument that is." He said, "A drum." He said, "That's right. That's a drum. Your instrument's a drum. Your instrument's a drum. Every instrument's a drum." If you start out thinking about you really need to think of your approach as rhythmic first. Rhythm is, in my opinion, the most important thing in music. Because rhythm is the one thing that we all have to agree on to start a song and to end a song in the same place. If we don't do that, there's going to be a train wreck, and a train wreck is one of the worst things that can happen in music. So, just think of yourself as a drummer. I always think of myself as a tuned bass drum. All you are is just a bass drum that knows what the chords are.
Drummer plus. That's it. I think we'll probably kind of wrap things up, but we'll have a little bit of time to chat and stuff if you guys want to. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that the new 20 Years Young, 2-decade compilation album, we just kind of received a bunch of the double vinyl of that, but the manufacturers didn't send the covers because they took forever or whatever. So what we've done is like signed a bunch of the kind of white label ones or whatever, if you guys want to get that. And there's downloads of interest to some of you who have heard a bunch of our music. There's some unreleased, really old stuff. There's some live stuff, and there's some things that we've done in the last few years that weren't released on Youngblood Records that are kind of interesting on there. And then there's also, whatever, T-shirts and tote bags and posters and all that good shit. But yeah, if you want to talk to anybody here more about what they're doing too, we'll have some time to do that. And then otherwise, we're playing that gig tomorrow night. I don't know if you guys know about that gig, but we're going to go play that gig. It's going to be great.
Where is that?
Yeah, it's at the Islington Assembly Hall. And, all right, because we're on the internet. And probably Islington, but this is just a wild guess. And speaking of new music and all that kind of stuff, we have this EP that's kind of almost ready to come out. That's all covers. That's pretty interesting. We'll play a bunch of it tomorrow night. But yeah, some kind of weird, interesting cover choices. Otherwise, thank you guys for making the trek on a Saturday night, spending your Saturday night sitting in a room with Youngblood. That's okay. What we do mostly on tour is sit in parking lots. So if you guys just stood outside, if you just go right from here to standing outside the tour bus for the next 12 hours, you'd be like, wow, this is so cool. This is what tour's like. You're driving on the road for 8 hours, and then you're standing in a parking lot for 12, and then for about 75 minutes a day, it's enjoyable, when you're playing the music. Anyway, yeah, thanks you guys, and we'll chat a little more.
Yeah.